She was
Adeza, honestly, what made you think a woman your age had anything useful to contribute here?
Not pulling her aside. Right there, in front of 15 people who suddenly found their laptops very interesting. Adeza, honestly, what made you think a woman your age had anything useful to contribute here? The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something terrible just happened and nobody wants to admit they witnessed it. Adeza Okafor didn't cry. She was 50 years old. She had buried a husband, raised 3 children alone, and survived things that would have folded younger women in half. She didn't cry. She straightened her blazer, picked up her folder, and walked out. But her hands were shaking. That was the day everything changed. She just didn't know it yet. Her name was Adeza, but the people who loved her called her Ada. She was the kind of woman who ironed her clothes at 5 in the morning, who kept a small photo of her late daughter tucked inside her Bible, who made jollof rice so good it made grown men close their eyes when they tasted it. She was also the woman raising her 6-year-old granddaughter Zara, alone. Because her daughter Shai Som had died 2 years ago in a hospital bed that Ada had held her hand in until the very last breath. Zara had her mother's eyes. Ada could barely look at her some days without feeling like she was drowning. And some days, looking at Zara was the only reason Ada kept going. She worked as the senior facilities coordinator at Meridian Group, a mid-sized consulting firm in Lagos. It sounded important. It wasn't. She managed the cleaning staff, the maintenance crew, the supply orders. She had been doing it for 11 years. She had given that company 11 years of her life. And today, her boss, a 34-year-old man named Emeka, who had been hired over her for a position she had trained the previous 3 people to do, had humiliated her in front of the whole team. She sat in her car in the parking lot and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. Then she called home to check on Zara. "Grandma, I drew a lion today," the little voice said. Ada exhaled slowly. Was it a beautiful lion? It was the most beautiful lion in the world. "Then save it for me. I'll frame it." She drove home and didn't tell anyone what happened, because there was nobody to tell. 3 weeks later, Meridian Group lost their biggest contract. The client had moved to Kang Holdings International, a Korean conglomerate that had quietly expanded into West Africa over the past 2 years and was now opening a Lagos headquarters so large it made people stop and stare when they drove past the construction site on the expressway. When Meridian started laying off staff to cover the losses, Adaz was the 4th name on the list. 11 years. She found out on a Tuesday morning via email. She read it twice. Then she went to the bathroom, locked the door, ran the tap so nobody would hear, and pressed her face into a towel. She cried for exactly 4 minutes. Then she washed her face, reapplied her powder, and went back to her desk. She found the job listing by accident. She had been applying everywhere: banks, hotels, NGOs, real estate firms. Zara's school fees were due in 6 weeks. The landlord had already called twice. She was applying to everything: Kang Holdings International, facilities and operations manager, Lagos headquarters. She almost scrolled past it. The salary range made her pause. She stared at it. She applied. She didn't expect a response. She got a call the next morning. The building was still half under construction when she arrived for her interview. She had to navigate past scaffolding and workers in hard hats just to reach the temporary executive offices on the 4th floor. She was the oldest person in the waiting room by at least 15 years. The other candidates all looked like they had just graduated from somewhere impressive and were performing competence in expensive sneakers. Ada smoothed her skirt and sat up straight. They called her name. She walked in, and then she stopped. Because the man sitting behind the desk was not the HR officer she had expected. He was tall, even-seated, with sharp features and dark eyes that assessed her in one quiet second without any performance about it. He was somewhere in his mid-40s. He was wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than 3 months of her old salary. There was a stillness about him, the kind of stillness that comes not from being calm, but from never needing to prove anything. He was Kang Ji-won, the CEO, Not the HR director, not a department head. The actual CEO of Kang Holdings International, sitting in on junior candidate interviews in a building that was still being plastered. She found out later he did this at every new location. He said he could tell more about a person in 10 minutes face-to-face than any resume ever revealed. "Sit down, Ms. Okafor," he said. His English was precise and unhurried. She sat. "You have 11 years at Meridian. Why did you leave?" She held his gaze. "They laid me off." Most people softened that. Called it a transition, a restructuring. Ada had decided on the drive over that she was done softening things. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something more like attention. "What did you do well there?" "I kept a 300-person office functioning without the leadership ever noticing there was anything to manage, which means I did my job perfectly." Silence. Then, just barely, the corner of his mouth moved. "And what did you do badly?" She thought about it honestly. "I stayed too long without advocating for myself. I let people get comfortable underestimating me." He studied her for a long moment. The role requires someone who can build a system from nothing. This facility is still being completed. You would be managing the construction handover, setting up the operational infrastructure, and eventually running a team of 40. The previous 2 candidates told me they had done similar things. I don't believe them. He paused. I think you have actually done it. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at him steadily. When do I start? She got the job. She didn't tell anyone except Zara, who celebrated by drawing a picture of Grandma in a big building with a cape.
I love you so much.
Ada put it on the fridge next to the lion. The first weeks were brutal and wonderful at the same time. There was so much to build. Vendor contracts, cleaning schedules, security protocols, maintenance systems. None of it existed yet. She worked 12-hour days. She came home exhausted, heated up whatever was in the pot, sat on the edge of Zara's bed until the little girl fell asleep, and then sat at the kitchen table with her paperwork until her own eyes gave out. She barely saw Kang Ji-won. He was always in meetings, always traveling, always on calls that seemed to span 6 time zones simultaneously. When they did cross paths, he was professional, contained. He asked direct questions, listened to her answers without interrupting, and moved on. But he noticed things. She realized this the morning she came in to find a new ergonomic chair at her desk, replacing the cheap plastic one she had never complained about but had been quietly adjusting for 2 weeks. No note, no explanation. She didn't say anything about it either. That felt like a language they both somehow already spoke. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted. She was the last one on the floor. The building was quiet, the Lagos skyline bleeding orange through the floor-to-ceiling glass. She was cross-checking a maintenance report when she heard footsteps and looked up. Kang Ji-won was standing in the hallway, jacket off, looking at his phone with the particular expression of a man whose evening had just catastrophically changed plans. "Ms. Okafor, you're still here. So are you." He looked up. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then, the investors' dinner fell through. The venue flooded. He said it the way someone says something when they're informing themselves as much as they're informing you. "I have leftover rice and stew in the break room," she said without really thinking about it. "My daughter's old recipe. I always make too much." She didn't know why she said it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Daughter?" Something crossed her face. She hadn't meant to say it that way. She passed. 2 years ago. I raise her daughter now, my granddaughter Zara. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was careful. "How old is Zara?" 6. She draws lions. He looked at her in that quiet, direct way he had, like he was actually listening, not just waiting for her to finish speaking. "I'll take the rice," he said. They ate at the small table in the break room. 2 people who were not supposed to be there eating from mismatched Tupperware containers, the city glowing outside the window. He ate the stew carefully at first, then unconsciously, quickly. "This is extraordinary," he said, like he was surprised to mean it. "It's just her recipe. Chisholm could cook better than me on a bad day." Ada was quiet for a moment. "Losing a child changes the way everything tastes. For a long time, I couldn't cook, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything except take care of Zara because she needed me to." He set down his fork. "How long before it felt normal again?" "It doesn't feel normal," she said quietly. "It feels like you learn to carry it differently, that's all." He was looking at the table now. "My wife left 3 years ago. I don't say that as a comparison. Grief is grief." She nodded once, no false comfort, no performance of sympathy. He appreciated that more than she knew. After that night, something changed between them. Not dramatically, not in any way either of them could easily name. But when he walked through the building now, he slowed down when he reached her office. When there were decisions about the facility, he didn't just receive her reports, he asked what she thought. When she disagreed with him, which she did twice directly and with evidence, he didn't dismiss her. He changed his position. The first time it happened, her colleague Bimpe stared at her like she had performed a miracle. "That man has never changed his position on anything," Bimpe whispered. Ada just went back to her spreadsheet, but she was thinking about the way he had looked at her across the break room table, like she was someone worth seeing clearly. She was 50 years old. She had forgotten what that felt like. Stay with me? Because what happens next? Nobody saw coming. The first sign of trouble came quietly. A car she didn't recognize parked outside her apartment building 3 mornings in a row. She noticed it the way mothers notice things. Without drama, without certainty, just a tightening in the chest. She said nothing. Then Zara came home from school one afternoon and said a man had spoken to her at the gate. Ada went very still. "What man?" "He said he knew my daddy." Zara's father. Emeka Duru. Not Adaizi's former boss, a different Emeka. A man who had disappeared the moment Chisholm's pregnancy became complicated. A man Adaiz hadn't seen in 7 years. A man she had raised Zara without, gladly, because any version of Zara's life without him in it was safer. She drove to the school the next morning and spoke to the security guard in a very calm, very controlled voice about who had access to that gate. Then she called her lawyer, and then, she didn't know why, she found herself standing outside Kang Ji-won's office door. She almost walked away. He opened the door before she knocked. "Ms. Okafor." He looked at her face. "Come in." She told him the basics, not everything. She wasn't the kind of woman who poured herself out on a first confession, but she told him enough. He listened without his face moving much. But his eyes, something moved behind them. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Do you have security at your building?" "A guard at the gate." "That's not enough." He picked up his phone and made a call in Korean. Short, clipped sentences. He hung up. "I have a security team. They'll begin monitoring your building tonight. Before you say no," he met her eyes. "This is not charity. This is a response to a threat. You can accept it or you can refuse it, but I want you to understand, I am not doing it because I think you're weak." She held his gaze for a long time. "Okay," she said. It was the hardest word she had said in years. The twist came 12 days later. She was at her desk when Bimpe walked in with a look on her face that meant something was wrong. "Ada, you need to see this." It was a news article, business news, a merger investigation. A competitor of Kang Holdings had filed a complaint with the regulatory body, alleging that Kang Holdings had acquired 2 Lagos properties through fraudulent documentation. The name attached to the competing complaint, Duru Capital, owned by one Emeka Duru. Ada read the name twice. Zara's father. He hadn't come back for Zara. He had come back because Kang Holdings had unknowingly built their Lagos headquarters on land that Emeka Duru believed he had a claim to. A claim built on forged documents and old connections. And he had discovered that the woman managing that building was the mother of his dead former girlfriend, the grandmother of his daughter. He was going to use Zara as leverage, as a distraction, as a human bargaining chip in a business war. He was already losing. Ada sat very still for a very long moment. Then she stood up, walked to Kang Ji-won's office, opened the door without knocking for the first time in 6 months, and put the article on his desk. He read it. The room was completely silent. When he looked up, his face was a controlled thing, but his jaw had tightened in a way she had learned to read. "How long have you known him?" he asked quietly. 7 years of not knowing him, she said. "He is Zara's biological father. He left before she was born. I did not know he had any connection to your business." "I believe you." 3 words. No hesitation. She exhaled something she hadn't realized she was holding. "He's going to try to take her," Ada said. Her voice didn't break, but it cost her something to keep it level. "He doesn't want her. He wants to destabilize you. She's just the method." Kang Ji-won stood up. "Then we make sure he can't reach her." The next 48 hours moved fast. Zara was quietly moved to a safe residence with 2 of Kang's security team, a warm, comfortable apartment with toys and a television, and a kind female officer named Soo-yeon, who braided Zara's hair and watched cartoons with her and told her they were playing a special game. Ada's lawyer filed a formal emergency custody document. Kang's legal team filed a counter-complaint with the regulatory body, backed by documentation so thorough it took 3 lawyers 4 hours to assemble. Emeka Duru's claim began to fall apart within hours. The forged documents had been forged badly. The contacts he had relied on had their own exposure to worry about and disappeared quickly. What had looked like a dangerous assault on Kang Holdings' Lagos operations turned out to be a desperate gamble by a man who had overestimated his resources. But desperate men are the most dangerous kind. He showed up at Ada Ease's apartment at 10 o'clock at night. She was alone. She had sent her neighbor away. She had told the security team she was fine. She had told them this because she didn't want anyone else in danger, and because some part of her felt that this was her confrontation to have. Her 7 years of silence finally cracking open. She opened the door before he could knock a second time. He was thinner than she remembered. Expensive watch, tired eyes, the face of a man who had been running from something for so long he had forgotten what he was running toward. "Adas." "Don't." Her voice was quiet. "You will not say my name in my doorway like we have something familiar between us. I want to see my daughter." "You don't have a daughter. You have a child you abandoned before she drew her first breath. Her name is Zara. She is my granddaughter. She has never asked about you, and she is safe and loved, and you will not go near her." He stepped forward slightly. "I have legal rights. You have nothing. My lawyer has already filed. Your documentation is forged, your business complaint is collapsing, and you came here tonight because you are out of options." She looked at him steadily. "And I want you to know that I am not afraid of you." She almost meant it. He took another step, and then, from behind him, a voice. Quiet, absolutely cold. "I would stop moving." Kang Ji-won was standing at the end of the hallway. He was in a dark coat, no tie, hands in his pockets, looking at Emeka Duru, with the particular expression of a man who has the resources to make problems disappear and is deciding whether this is the moment. 2 members of his security team were visible behind him. Emeka looked between them. Something went out of him then, like air leaving a balloon. The performance collapsed. "This isn't over," he said, but it was the kind of thing people say when it is. He left. Ada stood in her doorway for a long moment. Then she turned and looked at Kang Ji-won, standing at the end of her hallway, and said, "I told the team I was fine." "I know," he said. "I came anyway." She didn't have a response to that. Her throat was doing something she didn't want it to do in front of him. "How did you—" "You lied to the security team in the same way you told me once that you were fine when you had clearly been crying. Your voice goes flat." He paused. "I notice." She pressed her lips together. "Come in," she said finally. "I'll make tea." They sat in her small kitchen, the one where Chisom used to cook on Sunday mornings, the one with the crayon mark on the cabinet that Ada had never painted over because Zara had made it. He looked around her kitchen the way people look at rooms that tell the truth about a life, the photographs on the wall, the scripture verse above the sink, the school drawings magneted to the fridge. "The lion," he said, looking at the fridge. She looked up from the kettle. "Zara's. It's good. She's 6. Still good." Ada almost smiled. Almost. She set the tea down and sat across from him. "Why are you here?" she asked, not accusing, genuinely asking. He looked at her carefully. "Because I have been trying to find a reason not to be here for 4 months, and tonight I ran out of reasons." The kitchen was very quiet. "I am 50 years old, Jiwon." It was the first time she had used his given name. They both noticed. "I know how old you are." "People will talk. People talk about everything. That has never been a good enough reason to stop living." She looked at him. This man. This strange, contained, careful man who had put a chair at her desk without saying a word. Who had eaten jollof rice in a break room and told her about his marriage without performing. Who had shown up in her hallway tonight without being asked. "I am not easy," she said. "I have a child I am raising. I have grief I am still carrying. I have edges and opinions, and I do not perform softness." "I know." "And you're—" "I know what I am," he said simply. "I also know what I want. Those two things have rarely been the same. With you they are." She looked at her hands around the mug. "Chisholm would have liked you," she said quietly. "She would have interrogated you for 2 hours and then told me to keep you." He let that sit in the air. "Then I would have survived the interrogation," he said. Ada looked up, and this time she did smile. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was two people who had both been through fire learning slowly, carefully, that warmth was still possible. He came for dinner on a Friday and met Zara properly for the first time. Zara, who was 6 and fearless, looked at him for approximately 30 seconds and then said, "You have a serious face." He considered this. "I've been told. My grandma has a serious face too sometimes, but then she laughs and it's like the sun." Ada was in the kitchen pretending she hadn't heard that. After dinner, Zara showed him the lion drawing, and the one after that, and the 17 others she retrieved from under her bed in a slightly terrifying avalanche of paper. He sat on the floor of Ada's living room and looked at every single one. He pointed to one, a large creature with an enormous mane. "This one. What is he doing?" "Protecting his family," Zara said like it was obvious. He was quiet for a moment. "I like this one most," he said. Ada was watching from the doorway. Something in her chest had gone dangerously soft. The legal matter with Emeka Duru was resolved quietly over the following weeks. His business complaint was dismissed. He attempted no further contact. The emergency custody filing became a permanent one. Ada was named Zara's sole legal guardian, something she had been in every way that mattered for 2 years, but that now no one could challenge. At the courthouse after the judge signed the order, Ada walked out into the afternoon sun and stopped on the steps. She stood there for a moment, just breathing. Kang Ji-won was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He hadn't come inside. It wasn't his place, and he understood that. He looked up at her. She walked down to him, and without saying anything, she took his hand. He looked down at their hands, then up at her. He didn't say anything either. He didn't need to. Of course, the world had opinions. The women in her building said things. Her colleagues whispered. There was an article, brief, mean-spirited, in one of those Lagos gossip blogs that talked about the age gap, her past, her ordinariness, her audacity. A 50-year-old facilities manager. What could she possibly offer a man like that? He'll get bored. Ada read one of these things on her phone and then put her phone face down on the table. Zara was drawing at the other end of the table. She looked up. "Grandma." Are you okay? Yes, baby. Is it bad people saying bad things? Ada looked at this child, this 6-year-old who had her mother's eyes and apparently her grandmother's intuition. Sometimes people say things because other people's happiness makes them feel bad about their own life. It's not really about us. Zara thought about this seriously. We should feel sorry for them. Something like that. Zara went back to her drawing. Ada picked up her phone again and called Jiwon. He answered on the second ring. Someone wrote an article, she said. I know. My assistant flagged it this morning. And? And nothing. His voice was calm. Are you bothered by it? She thought about it honestly. I was, for about 4 minutes. And now? Now I'm talking to you. She could hear him exhale, not dramatically, just the particular exhale of a man letting go of a day. I'll be there at 7, he said. I'm making Chisholm's pepper soup. I'll be there at 6. She laughed, properly laughed. The laugh that felt like something unlocking in her chest that had been locked for a very long time. He met her friends 2 months later. Her church friends, her oldest friend Ngozi, who called herself Ada's unofficial security detail. Her neighbour, Mrs. Fashola, who had known her since Chisholm was a teenager. Mrs. Fashola studied him for approximately 3 minutes over a plate of small chops and then said in Yoruba to Ada, "This one has sense. You can keep him." Ada translated nothing. Jiwon looked between them. Was that good or bad? It was excellent, Ada said. He exhaled. Ngozi leaned over to Ada later in the kitchen and said very quietly, "He watches you the way Patrick watched our mothers. Like you are the fixed point and everything else is just scenery." Ada said nothing, but she held it. 6 months after that evening in the break room with leftover rice and the city burning orange outside the window, they were sitting on Ada's small balcony. Zara was asleep inside. Lagos was doing what Lagos does at night, loud and alive and relentless and beautiful. He had something in his hand, a small thing. He turned it over and looked at it for a moment. "My mother sent this from Seoul," he said. "She wants to meet you." Ada looked at what he was holding. A small jade bracelet. Old, the kind that gets passed through women in families. Jiwon. "She doesn't send this lightly." He paused. "Neither do I." Ada looked at the bracelet for a long time. "I'm 50 years old," she said, one final time. "Ada." His voice was so quiet and so certain. "You have said that to me as a warning at least 7 times. What exactly are you warning me about?" She looked at him. "That I might be the bravest thing you ever do," she said. He looked back at her steadily. "I know," he said. "That's why I want to do it." She took the bracelet from his hand. She didn't put it on immediately. She just held it, felt the weight of it, the age of it, the intention behind it. "Tell your mother," Ada said slowly, "that I would be honoured." It didn't make the gossip blogs the way real things rarely do. There was no announcement, no performance, no press release. Just a woman who had survived enough to know what peace felt like when it finally arrived. A man who had been controlled for so long that being seen clearly by someone was the most vulnerable and terrifying thing he had ever chosen. And a little girl who drew lions, who one morning padded out to the kitchen in her pyjamas and found her grandmother and this quiet man drinking coffee at the table, early morning light coming through the window, talking in low voices about nothing important. Zara climbed onto the chair between them without being asked. She picked up a crayon from the table, she left them everywhere, and started drawing. Neither adult stopped talking. They just made room. That was it. That was the whole thing. That was what the gossip blogs would never understand and could never take away. They said older women can't keep a man. They said she was past her season, that she had nothing new to offer, that a man with everything would never choose a woman with nothing left to prove. They were wrong. He didn't choose her despite who she was. He chose her because of it, because she was a woman who cried for 4 minutes and then washed her face. who carried grief like it was weight training, who made jollof rice and kept crayon marks on cabinets and held her dying daughter's hand and got up the next day anyway, because she looked at him across a break room table and offered him food without pity or performance, because she said, "I am not easy," and meant it as a truth, not an apology. He had been in rooms full of extraordinary people his whole life. He had never met anyone like Adai's, and she had spent 50 years becoming exactly the woman who could receive what he offered without diminishing herself to hold it. She put the jade bracelet on the morning they flew to Seoul. Zara was in the seat between them on the plane, drawing a lion with a small set of coloured pencils Jiwon had quietly placed in her bag before boarding. Ada looked down at her wrist, at the bracelet that had travelled from mother to daughter across generations and had somehow found her. Jiwon was reading something. He glanced up, saw her looking at her wrist, and went back to his reading. But he reached across Zara without looking up and took Ada's hand. Just that. Zara looked at their joined hands and then up at Ada with those eyes, Chisholm's eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, "is this the part where it gets good?" Ada felt something catch in her chest, something warm and cracked open and full. "Baby," she said softly, "this is exactly that part. If this story moved something in you, that is not an accident. Real love doesn't check your age. It checks whether you're ready to be seen. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of that.